have with us right now Brother Keith Brown from the OEA. He is the president of the union. I'll introduce, yeah, that's right. We've got Brother Bob Mandel, who was, in fact, a veteran of the 1996 OEA strike. Let's hear it for him, yeah. We've got Brother Jack Gerson, who was on our negotiating committee. Jack Gerson, there you go. And we got Brother Mike Shane, who has been involved for the last 10 years in the struggle to strengthen the OEA. Mike, let me know who you are. Okay, so we want to get started now, and the reason we want to get started, I'm not some fanatic on time. The thing is, we have to give up this space in terms of use to a group that shows up at 4:30 every Saturday like clockwork. We would like to hear from our panel, and we would also like to have a rich public discussion. We want to hear your questions and comments. In order to do all of that, we can't defeat ourselves, okay? So we want to get started. I'm going to start with Keith, if it's okay, all right? All right. Actually, Keith and myself were both involved in something called the Black Workers Organizing Center. And I've known Keith for, well, about 20 years or more. He is the Oakland Education Association president. He is a product of Oakland Public Schools himself. And he is a middle school teacher and has been so for 20 years, okay? Now, let's just let him get started. Keith, let me pass you the microphone and let's go.
Thank you, Brother Gerald. And thank you, everyone, for being here for this panel. So I just want to begin by saying about in December, I was at the march in Los Angeles, the March for Public Education, and there were 50,000 people marching in the streets of Los Angeles, 50,000 teachers, parents, community members marching for public education, and just being there in LA was so inspiring to see that kind of united power. And that sets the context of what's happening now in the month of January. So in January, we have a new governor coming in, a new legislature, and also we have January 10th, the teachers of Los Angeles going out on strike. And also at the same time, the teachers of Oakland, we are preparing for a strike in the winter. The OEA executive board voted unanimously to call for a strike authorization vote. That will be happening in January. So the attention in this state is on public education right now with the LA and Oakland contract battles. And we're fighting for the same things. We're fighting for a living wage to keep good educators in the communities with the students that they serve. Also, we are fighting for lower class size because we know the importance of having individual relationships with our students. And also we are fighting for increased student supports. We are fighting for more counselors, investments in nurses, investments in librarians. So this contract campaign that Oakland and Los Angeles is engaged in is not just about wages, but it's about community schools. It's about the learning conditions for our students, but also it's a fight against privatization the privatization that's attacking public education, not only in California, but across the state. So in California, last year we became the world's 5th largest economy, yet we rank 46 in education funding. And that is terrible, and that needs to change. That definitely needs to change. And as we've seen last spring across the country in states such as West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona, in the red states, an uprising, a rebellion where teachers, rank and file teachers were fed up with the not having enough textbooks for their students. They were fed up with miserable working conditions, and they were sick and tired of being told by politicians that there's no money to fund public education. So the teachers in the red states, they took direct action by walking out and shutting down schools and classrooms to ensure that their students get the resources that they deserve. So looking at what has happened last year with the Red State Rebellion, it has really energized the teacher union movement across the state of California. So that's what we're seeing right now with the Los Angeles strike happening January 10th, and also with the Oakland as we prepare for a major work action. And already in Oakland, we have seen many of our rank and file teachers walk out of the classrooms for their students, demanding that the district seriously addresses the teacher retention crisis in Oakland. So that what we call Red for Ed movement, which began in the red states last spring, has spread to Oakland, Los Angeles, and all over the state of California. So one thing that I also want to mention is that on January 12th, there is a rally. It is the East Bay Rally to Fund Public Education Now. That's going to be January 12th at Oscar Grant Plaza, Frank Ogawa Plaza, 12 noon on a Saturday.
There's some flyers.
And we have flyers right there. And there will be an Oakland contingent. The OEA contingent will meet at 11 o'clock at the Lake Merritt Amphitheater. That's the amphitheater right across from the old Henry J. Kaiser Center. And we will have a march from there to the rally. And if you see to my right, there's a sign that says "Ready to Strike for the Schools that Our Students Deserve." That sign was created today in the OEA offices. Our members have, and this is the last weekend of our winter break, but we have a few community members and some of our members working on creating signs for that march. So that's one of the examples of the signs that we will have for that march. And January 12th, it represents just the whole spirit of teacher activism that's happening within the state of California, where a group of locals within the California Teachers Association decided to go outside of the system, but to work together to address the issues in California in funding for education. So our three demands are to demand that our politicians address Proposition 13, and that there is true changes to Proposition 13 to make sure that our students and also communities get funding, resources that they deserve. Also, we are addressing increased funding for special education. And the last demand is for the state to address the teacher retention crisis, which has been exacerbated by the high cost of living in many areas in California. So it is because of the context of OEA's fight, Oakland Education Association's fight, and UTLA, the United Teachers of Los Angeles fight, that many teachers are taking for aggressive action to address the issues of funding in public education. Also, one thing I want to mention about our contract battle in Oakland as we prepare for a strike is that we are ground zero for the privatization movement in Oakland. We have a school board who is funded by outside billionaires, funded by the Charter School Association, and it is because of our school board and district that they put as their priority charter schools. They have put also outside consultants where annually we are losing $57 million a year because of unregulated private charter school growth, where that money could be going to our students in the public schools. Also, we have something in Oakland, a process called the Blueprint process, which is basically a portfolio model of education, which began in New Orleans. And if you look at New Orleans, basically the public education system in New Orleans has been destroyed. Privatizers used Hurricane Katrina for their reason to attack students by privatizing the schools. And basically in New Orleans, every school is a charter school. And there's a movement to bring that sort of model, the portfolio model, across the country. And in Oakland, it is happening with our the community of schools from our school board. So just about a week before the holiday break, teachers at a middle school in East Oakland, teachers and community and parents of Roots International Middle School found out from the superintendent at a community meeting that their school is targeted for closure. And this was done without any input from teachers in the community, and this is a direct attack on our Black and brown students. We should not be closing schools in Oakland. We should be investing in schools, especially in East Oakland, West Oakland. We need more resources for our students. So this contract campaign, it represents a fight against privatization. Eli Broad, a real estate mogul who has really invested in the charter school movement and also has invested in influencing school boards to privatize school districts. Matter of fact, the Oakland Education Association, we are entering fact-finding in the month of January, where the OEA and the OUSD both appoint a representative to the fact-finding panel, which meets with a state-appointed neutral. And the district, the person that they appointed to represent them in fact-finding is a graduate of the Broad Academy. So the the OUSD they're tipping their hands of their priorities. Their priorities are to move forward with school closures. Their priorities are to privatize public education. So we basically exhausted all of our options as far as going to school board meetings, lobbying, signing petitions, and the time is now to really call the question, and I really believe that the teachers in Oakland are ready, loud and clear. We've been organizing, as you've seen what has happened with Oakland High teachers and other teachers taking direct action. We are ready to fight. So we are ready to call the question and strike if necessary to win a contract that not only addresses a living wage for our teachers, but a contract that addresses a true investment in our students, a true investment in community schools, not charter schools, not outside consultants funded by millionaires and billionaires. And I just want to say that at this moment, everyone is watching what is happening in California. We're getting a lot more coverage in the media. When I'm looking at Facebook, every day there's a different article about the UTLA OEA contract battle. So this is an opportunity that we have this winter to show that we're ready to fight for our students. So since I'm here, I have an opportunity to ask that everyone here join the students and teachers of Oakland January 12th at Oscar Grant Plaza. Either come there at noon or come meet with the Oakland contingent at 11 o'clock at the Lake Merritt Amphitheater. There's also flyers for the community art build, which is happening on January 18th, 19th, and 20th at the OEA Center at 272 East 12th Street. And that's an event where you could just drop in, and basically it's our way of connecting with the community through art, through social protest art, through social justice art, to create banners and signs which will be used in the OEA strike. And also January 9th to show a presence at the school board meeting to stand with our teachers at Roots as they fight against school closure. And one last thing, there's statewide on January 11th, there will be a walk-in to support the Oakland Education Association and also the United Teachers of Los Angeles. So there's a statewide call on January 11th to wear red for the Red for Ed movement. And also there will be walk-ins across the state to show solidarity with OEA and UTLA. So again, I appreciate being here, and I'll be here to answer questions. And we stand together in solidarity for our students and communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, brother. Our next speaker is Brother Michael Shane, a 20-year veteran teacher. He is currently the site rep at Sojourner Truth Independent Studies in East Oakland, and he is a founding member of Classroom Struggle. Mike, please.
Thank you, Darryl. just to get a sense of what, kind of to open with, how many folks, by a show of hands, are products of public schools? And one more, how many folks currently have a child or a grandchild in public schools?
What about
So I think, one of the catch words in the left these days is intersectionality, which, I don't know how effective that is, but I do know that education, and specifically public education, is where the class intersects objectively every day. Everybody should be concerned about what's been going on in public education around the country. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a little background on where the current deform movement that is being brought to you by our ruling class leaders began. In the 70s, the onset of neoliberalism began. So you had deregulation, union busting, and everything, all the others that goes with it. By the 80s, the National Business Roundtable met and decided that there was a crisis in public education. And that was nice of them, since it was basically they orchestrated the crisis by the criminal underfunding and under-resourcing of public education from the beginning. A little bit off. Thank you. And then the early 90s, the first charter school opened for business in Winona, Minnesota in 1992. Okay? The California Charter Act of 1992 was basically amended the state constitution so charter schools could be exempt from the law forbidding institutions receiving public money to be privately operated. Okay? So their big thing is that they're public schools too. I respectfully disagree. The original goal of charter schools was for them to be freed from some of the bureaucratic limitations of the public school districts, and for them to then go about develop some kind of secret sauce, and then ultimately share it with public schools that were struggling to meet some of the standards around test scores and the like. So that was the original goal, but now they've gone from the need to create this secret sauce to actually becoming the secret sauce, one part of the recipe of the secret sauce of privatization. And so that's kind of, basically what they've become, deviating from the original goal of them being able to supposedly create some of these secret sauce to help out the poor, struggling public schools. So there's, like I said, there's many ingredients. So bipartisanship. The two political parties actually agree on the need to privatize public education. You saw, Bush Jr. with No Child Left Behind. Obama, not to be outdone, he doubled down and created a race to the top. Prop 39 is kind of a local California-specific legislation that allows charter schools to claim unused space. Okay, so what that looks like is that every year there's these what they're called Prop 39 offers go out to charter schools around Oakland specifically. And even it's gotten to the point where these charter schools will be offered spaces in 2 or 3 different public schools. And then because obviously that is not a functional way to actually run a school, they expect the public schools to chop themselves up while they then take over whole campuses and whatnot. Personally, I am on a campus that is what's called co-located. That's where public schools and charter schools share the same campus. We share our campus with a school called Baytech, which I will go into a little more in detail in a few minutes. So another part of the whole privatization scheme is the Astroturf NGOs. In Oakland, we have great Oakland public schools. We have the New Schools Venture Fund, and there's also Educate 78. These are specifically their design. What they go about is they go about and advocate for charter schools, and kind of the need for more school choice, and all kind of what we've seen from the this privatization movement, they've been a central part of it. And Oakland doesn't have this problem, but mayoral control of school boards and public schools is also a big thing. Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, some of the bigger urban centers that are known for having mayoral control. And then also the billionaires. The billionaires, you know, I don't have any problem with billionaires donating money to public education. But you know what? Donate the money and then, you know, shut the front door on the way out. You don't get a say in what goes on with that money. You don't need to have some, you know, a say in how schools, you're a billionaire. What do you know about public education?
You don't have to talk so close to the microphone. It's muddy when you do.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so big thing, charter schools are not public schools. Charter schools tend to play a divide and conquer role. There's been many a school board meeting where 500 to 1,000 people show up to protest and rally about what's going on in public schools. And that same night, there'll be an organization there because there's a public hearing about a charter school. So that it's all the same folks, but you know, one side is there to protest what's going on in public education. The other side's there is to campaign for their right to do that. Exactly, is to create a charter and then go about, you know, educating through what their charter says. Tiered public education. Oakland has 2 tiers already. We have the hills, the Oakland Hills, and the flats. Now the flats become tiered in that they offer public schools and charter schools. The ruling class loves different tiers. Charter school students, you know, like the charter schools don't provide the special services that by law public schools must provide around special ed, language needs. Charter schools also have the right to do what's called counsel out their students. It's just a very, you know, a euphemistic term for expelling students. I worked for a year at a charter school called KIP. KIP is one of the larger charter school organizations nationwide. They have a school in West Oakland called KIP Bridge. I worked there for a year. It was co-located with a public middle school. And so the divisions that were unnecessary divisions, so here we have all these students from the same neighborhood, and the KIP teachers, you know, teachers I worked with would, you know, kind of push this line that, look at those public school students, you know, that you're not like them, you know, because the KIP program is that it's very rigid military style discipline. They have to stand in a straight line. In line, they have to do something. They can't just be, you know, standing in line. They have to actually do what's known as assign themselves. So they have to fumble around standing in a straight line and read a book or do their homework. I can't tell you how much time was wasted every day for the students to stand in a straight line. And this is middle school, mind you. These kids, they don't ever want to stand in any kind of line. I currently work at a public school, Sojourner Truth Independent Study School. We share a campus with Baytech, which is a charter, and we also share a campus with Rudsdale Continuation. That's a public school as well. Baytech, last year, just so folks know, Baytech is aligned with Fethullah Gulen. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Fethullah Gulen, who is a imam exiled from Turkey after he fell out with Erdogan. In the 90s, he came here, and the Clintons gave him a grant to go begin starting public schools across the country. So he has many different public schools. Baytech, the school on our campus, is one of them. Last year, the principal was going to be moving on. And we came to find out that during mid-year, he rewrote his own contract for a severance of $450,000.
Oh, man.
And the board of Baytech actually approved that because I'm sure they just didn't read the fine print. And then on top of that, the parents at Baytech, the large majority of the students at Baytech are black and brown kids from East Oakland, but they do have about 10 to 15% of these Turkish expats that send their kids there. And so last year, the parents were being charged for uniforms and graduation tickets. So you see how, you know, we kind of see how charter schools, you know, like in this kind of, before, you know, the full privatization, they're kind of holding space, and they are actually costing parents even more and more money by doing these things. When the district, because the district last year voted to give them a 10-year lease, 5 years, and then after 5 years, Baytech gets to decide if they want another 5 years. And so they were, praising what was going on. And after it came out that all this corruption was going on up there, they asked them why. Well, why hadn't you been investigating? And they said, well, we didn't want to be accused of racism for investigating Baytech. So last time I checked, Turkey was not a race, nor was Islam. And I don't know how much the Fethullah Gulen and his little religion plays a part, but I do know that the corruption that existed was partly being done to provide funding for his movement in Turkey. As I don't know if folks know, he was the one blamed for the coup in Turkey, Fethullah Gulen, even though he lives in the Poconos. So I've been a member of a group called Classroom Struggle. We originated during the Occupy Oakland movement, and we organized to fight these school closures that were going on at the time, and also some union busting that was known as accelerated TSAs. So we started during Occupy. Originally we were called the Occupy Oakland Education Committee. Both Jack and Bob were members of that group. On the night that Occupy Oakland voted to organize a general strike, the school district voted to close 5 public elementary schools. So from there on, there were marches organized in defense of these elementary schools. There was quite a bit of parent organizing going on. Like, the parents were really outraged that they would have the nerve to close these public schools. And to appease them, the district kind of, and to kind of circumvent all the organizing, the district basically said that all the parents would have their first choice of schools, which was just a bold-faced lie because they knew they couldn't, provide that. We are currently not an official caucus within OEA, but we do work within OEA. We've had members on the e-board for the last 3 or 4 years. But we, as we continue to organize with parents and students, we don't have any official status within the union. We did help organize the current leadership caucus known as Build Our Power, which Keith is, as president, and another Ishmael as vice president. Other things that Classroom Struggle has participated in, the district a long time ago decimated adult education, but there was still about 4 or 5 schools that provided adult education throughout the district. So that was one thing that we took on, and we, through organizing with parents and whatnot, helped save the last remnants of adult education. Then there was during a winter break, I don't know how long, a couple of years ago, but the old administration building on 2nd was flooded. And then after that, they were trying to sell that piece of land, and next to it, which housed Dewey Continuation School. So we organized, helped organize, in defense of Dewey and for the right to that school to stay open. So this is kind of what, to me, like, as we've done these things, we had when the sit-in that we led at Lakeview, one of the 5 elementary schools that they closed during Occupy, we led a 18-day sit-in, helped organize it. We had, the one thing I could say about the sit-in was that we needed much more parental involvement and the actual people that, were affected the most by those closures. Because what we had all the activists and, some help from our committee and others. Well, we just didn't have enough people to really maintain that sit-in, and then the police came in and closed us down. After that, we marched up to Tony Smith's house in protest and whatnot. But just in general, I think, we do need to defend, but we also need to transform public education. Because as somebody who's worked in public education for a long time, it's not doing enough to really satisfy the needs of our students and their families. But that's all I have for you right now. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Let's hear it for him. Come on now. Our next speaker is Brother Bob Mandel. Now, Bob was elected 5 terms on the executive board of the Oakland Education Association. He served on the 2010 bargaining team for healthcare, and he co-organized the newly recognized union today, Richmond, California. Bob?
For a double check. Can you hear me if I speak from this? People in the back, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm sorry. My voice is so bad. This is what I use in the classroom now. Gerald asked me to talk about the lessons of the '96 strike. Why it didn't win, it ended up in a draw, and how demoralizing the lack of victory was. It resulted in the union not being in a position to strike for another 10 years. And I'm going to do something that I never do because of lack of time. I'm going to go through punchlines of the lessons first, and then come back to the details. Number one, don't underestimate your enemy. UTLA and OEA are going up against some of the most powerful people in global capitalism. Gates, Broad, the Walton family, and the state of California. This is not rhetoric. Strikes are class war. How many of you have actually been on strike? Okay, so you know strikes are scary. You never know what's going to come out at the end. People's livelihoods are at stake, and in this case, the future of children and young people is at stake. So this is going to be a very tough fight, and yesterday, for the first time in U.S. history, as far as I know, the privatizers went to federal court to try to get an injunction against part of the teacher strike. Number two, don't trust the Democratic Party. Keith has already said, I think Shane said, fifth largest economy in the world, 46th in education spending, and a Democratic supermajority for the last 6 to 8 years. Don't trust the Democratic Party. Number three, no confidence and no trust in CTA, the statewide teachers union, because it has demonstrated again and again it won't go up against Prop 13. It has refused to go up against the corporate interests. It has, for decades, failed to organize common expiration dates. OEA and UTLA should be going out at the same time, and there should be sympathy strikes all over the state. Number four, solidarity with the other workers in the school district and the other unions. The catastrophic mistake internally of the '96 strike is that CTA, for months and for at least 2 weeks into the strike, had on the table the proposal to lay off other school district workers, to pay for class size reduction, and to pay for teacher raises. Half the call was to CHOP administration. The other half of the call was what I just said. Labor sanction is critical. I don't know if OEA has Central Labor Council sanction yet, but I sure as heck hope so, and it needs to get it. Lesson number 5, fight for what you need, settle for what you can win. One of the reasons the '96 strike was enormously powerful, and it was, is because it was fighting for the first time for class size reduction. And the community knew it, and knew that the aim of the strike was to improve education in the classroom. And for those of you who are not teachers, just imagine schools without libraries. That's the reality. Just imagine schools with no or outdated computers, with lead in the water that the kids drink. That's the state of American public education in Oakland, in LA, all over this country. So fight for what you need. Number 6, there is the money. And the money is, look at downtown Oakland right now. Look at the construction industry. Think of a man named Walter Shorenstein or his son Doug. They own a quarter of downtown San Francisco. They own the Sears building in Chicago. They own down to the center of downtown Oakland. City Center is not public, it's private. Look at Wells Fargo Bank and what it did to all of its customers. California-centered bank. The fight needs to be in exposing the people who are behind privatization, that they profit from privatization, they will profit from portfolio schools, they profit from charters, they profit from all the farming out of contracts to supply books or supply this or the other thing. They are stinking rich. They should be forced to pay. And OEA actually succeeded in 2010 after a 5-year effort, both education and demonstrations. We got a 1-year freeze on healthcare costs from Kaiser. Nowhere else in the country did that happen. It can be done in the middle of a strike. Part of what the union should be doing is not only shutting down the school sites, but going downtown and pointing at all those buildings and changing the political debate. So the debate is, where can the money come from? So there's a librarian in every school. There's a nurse in every school. There are enough counselors for kids. Where can the money come from? One more point, legality. I believe that Keith said, somebody said, that I think in LA, they've already done regressive bargaining, the employer. Regressive bargaining is that theoretically, once you've put your bargaining items on the table, you can't go for stronger, you can only cut. Well, the red state teachers proved that you don't have to obey the law. And strikes are powerful things, and when people start to fight, their consciousness jumps, their creativity jumps, their willingness to go for what is actually needed jumps. So when CTA comes in, and if I were rich, I would bet you $1 million. CTA will come in and say, to Keith and say to the bargaining team, and has already said to UTLA, you can't ask for more because that's regressive bargaining. It doesn't have to stand. So, some details on how it doesn't have to stand. Well, how much time do I have? 6 minutes, good. So some of the details on the 96 strike, which, if you don't know, was reportedly the longest strike by teachers in California history. Started with a 2-day strike, then a 1-day strike, then a 23-day strike. We were striking, demanding, chop from the top, the firing of the management class. And when I say don't underestimate your enemy, think about saying to managers, fire yourselves. Think about it. Think about saying to the owner of a company, fire yourself. Are they about to do it? Not hardly. There was a gross underestimation by CTA, which actually ran our strike. Our leading spokesperson, Ward Roundtree, was not an OEA, he was CTA staff. They simply did not prepare people for the fact that this would be the most serious battle possible. Number 2, on the Democratic Party, the assumption was that Ron Dellums, who was the Barbara Lee of his day, and indeed Barbara served on his staff, that Dellums and the Dellums machine would support our strike. They didn't. They supported the school board. They supported Gene Kwan, who was on the school board. They let all the race baiting pass, and there was a torrent of race baiting, which may happen this time too. At the time, OEA was 52% Caucasian, 48% teachers of color, 40% of the membership was African American. Nonetheless, again and again and again, from day one, the charge was these are literally carpetbaggers, white teachers from the outside striking against the children of color, primarily African American, then in the city. And because this demand was on the table to lay off other workers, it ensured that the race baiting could even flourish. So there was this assumption that Dellums and company would support us. They wouldn't. If there were more, it's worth knowing that the black administrative class of Oakland came from the gains of the civil rights movement. And it made the whole strike issue and the race issue very complex. Because until 1965, if you were black, you couldn't be a waitress or a hostess in Jack London Square. You couldn't get a job as a printer at the Oakland Tribune. And the Panthers and the civil rights movement cracked the city and shifted the city. And one of the ironies of the strike is that we were striking against a subclass of management that was largely African American. What else do I want to say? Prop 13, CTA twice made runs at Prop 13. We got the signatures to put it on the ballot to abolish the split roll. Big business came to CTA literally and said, you do this and we will go after Dushchakov. Guess what happened to dues checkoff 6 months ago? The Janet's case. Goodbye, right? You don't make concessions, you fight for what you need. Confidential bargaining. CTA told us that we had to bargain in secret. That meant the membership didn't know day to day or week to week what was on the table. Management knew, management's allies knew, but it was confidential. We discovered 3 years later. I went down to PERB, Public Employees Relations Board, to look at the law. And I ran into the guy who happened to be the chief administrative law judge. And I said, please tell me. And he said, oh, it's a gentleman's agreement. There's no law. One of the major changes that Keith has inherited starting in 2006, we abolished confidentiality in bargaining. So I will stop at that. There's lots more to say.
Probably can see by now there's not going to be enough time, even if there were 24 hours, for us to go over what's been done to Oakland. I'm going to try to amplify some of the things that Bob talked about, and Keith and Shane also, and I'm going to talk a bit about bargaining. I want to begin by saying Bob talked about what happened with CTA with Prop 13. You won't hear that from CTA, but I can verify it because we found out about that at a meeting at CTA State Council, and I believe it was 2010, of two committees, the Financing Public Education Committee, which I was on, and the Political Involvement Committee. There were about 150, 200 people in the room and top CTA staff. And I asked them why they had backed out 7 years earlier, 6 years earlier. And they wouldn't respond at first and said, well, it's because the typical line, which they'd used up till then, was, well, we only had 40 to 45% support in the preliminary polling. They hadn't even begun to campaign, and they had 40 to 45% support. That's a reason to pursue it and win, not to pull out. And then they said, well, the Chamber of Commerce approached us, one of the top staffers said, and told us, if you don't pull Prop 13, then we are going to go after the agency shop dues checkoff. And so they said we had to pull it. Well, then you have to lose every fight that means anything, because they will always do that. So that's, to me, that was a graphic lesson about how CTA backs off, how CTA won't fight forward, and why we need to make sure we need to have the resources that CTA provides, but we can't have confidence in how they're going to proceed. I recall walking into the fact-finding panel on the OEA OUSD contract dispute in January 2010. I walked in with Bob, and Bob said to me, you know, it looks like there are three sides here: the district, the state, and the union. But really, there's only one side. CTA made the presentation for us. The district co-opted some of the largest consultants to the state, who were being paid by the state, to serve on their bargaining team and to represent them on the fact-finding panel. These people traveled around the state. Each day it was a different community in which they held their fact-finding negotiations. And it was one big happy family. They were there to get to yes, not to fight. We won't get what we need unless we fight. Yesterday, one of the teachers involved in the Oakland High Wildcat sickout, asked, is this really a conspiracy in Oakland, or are they just incompetent, or what? So I gave the answer I usually give, which is, well, it's hard to tell how much is ineptness and how much is incompetence. But then, after I thought about it, I said, wait a second. You know, there's been an assault on public education, on the public sector, going on for half a century. This is something, we don't have to call it a conspiracy or not. This is a planned assault, and it's been going on for decades. I first came across it in education in 1972 when I was in my early mid-20s teaching in New York City. At the time, there was something called the Economic Development Council of New York. It was essentially a sitting committee of the CEOs of the largest corporations in the New York area, which at that time meant the world. The head of Esso, the head of Mobil, that was before they merged into Exxon. The head of Metropolitan Life, New York Life. The head of AT&T, and others. I still remember some of their names, William Ellinghouse, George Shinn, and so on. They put out big, glossy brochures and lobbied the editorial writers in the New York dailies to say that the public sector, the cost of public services, was strangling the private sector. Something had to be done. We had to bell the cat. We had to cut the public sector, and we had to go after those public sector unions. There was a transit strike. They blamed that less than 0.1% for inconveniencing the other 99.9% by demanding decent pay and decent services for transit. So in 1972, the Economic Development Council, working through the Ford Foundation, Mario Fantini, the Ford Foundation's educational director being the point person, sent teams into junior high schools in Manhattan to demonstrate, to prove, quote unquote, that class size didn't matter. It didn't help student achievement, and that teacher preparation didn't matter. So we could cut teacher preparation time in half and increase class size, they said, and students would do as well or better. Well, they didn't succeed at that point in pushing it back, but that was the opening guns. What came next 3 years later, people may remember, was the New York fiscal crisis, Big Mac, the Emergency Financial Control Board, run directly by the bankers. The bankers, the Rockefellers and Walter Wristons and so on, stepped out from behind their desks and took control of New York. And William Simon, the Secretary of Treasury for Gerald Ford, said, essentially, we said directly, we're going to teach this city a lesson so that no city tries to go where this one did again. That is, to try to provide some public services, to try to provide something to public service unions. This was a concerted effort in war, and it proceeded from there. So in 1982, the Reagan administration came out with something called A Nation at Risk. And then Shane talked about what happened from there with the Business Roundtable and so on. It's important to recognize this was a bipartisan attack. When No Child Left Behind was passed in 2001, at the end of this period, the strongest proponents of No Child Left Behind were Democrats, and very liberal Democrats. Senator Ted Kennedy and Representative George Miller from the Bay Area, from Martinez, who to this day is probably still demanding that teacher evaluations be based on high-stakes student test scores. So let's be clear. That's what the Democratic and the liberal wing and the left liberal wing of the Democratic Party has long stood for. It stood for, in particular, pumping wealth from the public to private corporations and billionaires. That's what neoliberalism is. It's the commodification and recommodification of everything that can be commodifized. Privatize everything and pump wealth to the private sector. And deregulate capital and corporations and regulate people, especially workers, especially students, especially unions. Okay. So I'm going to have to now jump to the 2003 state takeover because I ain't going to have a lot of time. In 2003, the state of California took over the Oakland School District, ostensibly because there was a $37 million deficit. When they left 6 or 7 years later, the deficit was $111 million. They exactly tripled it. They're good mathematicians. Now, when they took over, someone named Jack O'Connell, who had been a Democratic Party state legislator, ran and won the position of State Superintendent of Public Instruction in 2002. In the prior elections, the total spent on campaigns for that position would be about $50,000. In 2002, Los Angeles billionaire Eli Broad and his allies, John Doerr, Mr. Silicon Valley Venture Capital, provided the seed funding for Google and for Amazon, and is the main venture capitalist in the New Schools Venture Fund that Shane mentioned. And Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, before that the CEO of Pure Software, and at the time, the president of the State of California School Board. The three of them, all billionaires combined, gave $500,000 to Jack O'Connell. He got $100,000 in someplace else, CTA. Okay, speak in the mic, it says. Okay, now, so O'Connell, with $500,000 funding from the billionaires and $100,000 from CTA, becomes State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Democratic State Senator Don Perrotta of Oakland, the President pro tem of the State Senate, writes and pushes through SB 39, which puts Oakland into state receivership. Democratic Mayor Jerry Brown and Jack O'Connell ask Los Angeles billionaire Eli Broad to name the first state administrator. Broad says Randolph Ward, who just happened to be enrolled in Eli Broad's Urban Superintendent Academy. Randolph Ward essentially ran the district with a crew of Eli Broad trainees who took over administration, combined with the Gates Foundation, running through something called BASES, which now calls itself the National Equity Foundation. BASES and Gates handled academics, instructions, testing, Broad administration. The Broad philosophy was school districts are essentially big corporations and should be run as such, with schools as profit centers and students as profit sources, revenue sources. He said it was insane to run any big corporation from the bottom up. School districts had to run from the top down, and proceeded to try to extract a profit from the student profit revenue sources by shutting down the libraries in almost every middle school, most high schools, by laying off scores of custodians, almost eliminating the maintenance department. Gerald can testify to that. He worked in as an electrician, and so on. Adult education, where Bob worked, which had over 30,000 students, was gutted to the core. So that's what happened. Those are only a few of the things that happened in the state takeover. In 2006, OEA prepared, and there was a 4% across-the-board pay cut of all employees, which was supported then by CTA and then OEA President Sheila Quintana. In 2006, OEA prepared to strike against this. We had Labor Council sanction. We were supported by the other school workers' unions who were going to honor the lines. But at literally the 11th hour, with most teachers asleep preparing to get to their lines by 6 a.m. for the strike, OEA President Ben Visnick unilaterally called it off. Randy Ward showed up at bargaining, said give them this and give them that. Ben Visnick said we'll take it. Now, I remember that because we had to get out to the schools early to tell people, hey, there's no, people said, what? What do you mean there's no strike? He did not contact the executive board. What was given away? What was given away was previously OEA had always had fully employer-paid health care. That was given up. And to this day, we haven't gotten it back. But in the next round of bargaining, starting in 2007, we did sunshine 3 demands. One of them was for fully restored employer-paid health care. Second was for a maximum class size of 15 in all decile 1 and 2 schools, that is the lowest achieving schools, nearly all the schools in the flatlands in Oakland, and 20 in all other schools, and a 20% across-the-board pay raise. When we made those demands, Ward Roundtree, who Bob mentioned, the CTA executive director for Oakland, scoffed at us, said we're out of our minds. We got similar feedback from others in this ilk. And that lasted until the members heard what the demands were. There was an overwhelming response for them. And in fact, when teachers in other school districts heard, they had the same response. And so, from being scoffed at, we became celebrities with the Alameda Contra Costa Education Association newsletter featuring our great demands. But almost immediately, CTA began a war of attrition to wear them down. We have to be realistic. What's a real bottom line? Come on. You know, sure, well, we're glad people were for this, but now what are you really for? There's only 1 minute left, unfortunately. Thanks, Dave. If we are, now, if you go for that bottom line, then you're saying we're throwing our demands out. Because, first of all, CTA will go to the district and tell them, but secondly, the district will have people who will find out. So do not go there. Instead, we called for complete transparency. We put out bulletins on every negotiation of anything that was demanded. And we were lectured by CTA about doing that. When we went into fact-finding, I was taken aside by a CTA leader from their state headquarters, and who grilled me on what I planned to say, because they wanted to make sure that I was saying, that I was going to be safe to go into the room. I told them, I'm just going to talk about, how we have to get to yes. And then I went into the room. Okay. I think Gerald says take your time. Okay. I want to say one other thing, because I don't want, I think there needs to be time for people to ask what they need to ask. Bob stressed that it's really important to fight for the money. We have to fight for it in 2 ways. We need 3 ways. One is there's a tremendous amount of waste that could be cut, but that's not enough to restore everything that's been cut. Leave aside to provide what's really needed. Because, as Shane said, the status quo is unacceptable. We don't want to go back to the way things were in 1954 or 1964. We want to fight forward so that public education is not susceptible to this kind of attacks. We need to stop the flow of money out, the outrageous outsourcing. Oakland is now outsourcing 3.5 times per student what the average school district does in California, and the average school district outsources way too much. If we did that, we would probably get close to $70 million, or that would be a huge start. Beyond that, though, is going after the banks and corporations to provide what's needed. Bob didn't mention that he and I and 5 other teachers were arrested in Wells Fargo Bank in 2011 in downtown Oakland. And following that, we actually got a sit-down meeting between OEA and a few other unions and and Wells Fargo Bank. They did not give us the $100 million we were asking for. And one final place to go is the state, which tripled our deficit, which sued Oakland for having excess administrators during the state takeover, when the state was running the district. They ran the district and they sued us for their malfeasance. We still owe the state on the $100 million loan, and they're still collecting interest on it every year, $6 million or so. That should be repudiated. Not only should there be a moratorium on the interest, but that debt should be forgiven. That's something, if these politicians in Sacramento are real, then they'll do that. They're not, so they won't, but that's what we have to fight for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I want to make a couple of quick announcements to just reinforce what we just experienced. Number one, this is not an abstraction. We know. I hope that people have seen these signs all around the city. They didn't just jump into the windows. One of the groups called the Democratic Socialists of America, in alliance with the OEA, organized teachers and community members to go store to store and door to door and invite people to put these signs up in their establishments and their homes. Good, a necessary step. It all helps. That's positive. Get in touch with the DSA. Get in touch with the union.
It was in Chicago. People remember the 2012 Chicago strike got national attention. Leaders of the strike went around the country claiming great victories. But 6 months later, they closed over 50 schools. They had said before, during, and after the strike they would. The bargaining team there put it on the table. The district said, sorry, we're not going to bargain it. And the bargaining team said, okay, then it's off the table, and we're not bargaining it. I expect that in Oakland, if that's demanded, and in LA, they'll say, we're not going to bargain it, it's extra contractual outside the contract. But it can be fought for, nevertheless, in the strike. You can strike and say, we're going out, and no school closures is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing we can fight for. So I think that's number one. Number two, every spring there's a parade of contractors into the school board meetings. They were given tens of millions of dollars, and they've used them up already, even though the contract's for the year. And the school board, almost without fail, gives them an extension, gives them more money, sometimes almost double total. There needs to be a moratorium on that. No pass-through on that. Everyone needs to be carefully examined. It may be, unfortunately, one or two need to be approved because students need them, but most of them don't, and we should shut those down. There's over $80 million that goes out every year in contract. That money should be reclaimed.
Or the district has announced the school closure of Roots, that's at the Havens Court campus in East Oakland. And there's a board meeting that's really crucial to whether or not that decision is going to go through, which is this Wednesday, January 9th. And that's at La Escuelita. There's a rally, is it at 5:30? Keith, do you know?
I think 5,
I think it's at 5. Okay, and then the meeting begins at 6:30, so it's really important that we stack the public comment. La Escuelita, what's the address?
Second Avenue is across from the Lady Field. There's like second Avenue and East End.
It's Third Avenue.
3rd Avenue and East End. Okay, so we'd really like to see you there. And that's the first wave of the citywide plan to close.
It's La Escuelita is what it's called.
La Escuelita Elementary School.
One more thing, which is, it's absolutely true that the driving force in low student achievement, the highest correlate, is inequality, poverty, and that's a function of race and class. So it's not going to be eliminated under capitalism. But how do we fight? How do we make the fight for better education part of and connected to a fight against capitalism? Right now, we have a fight on our hands against the destruction of public education nationwide. We have to take that defensive struggle and turn it into an offensive struggle. But we don't do that by starting with simply revolution. We have to do both.
Very good, Jack.
So first, I would just like to shout out one of the members of Classroom Struggle. He's been, thankfully, he's been operating the camera back here for us. But please, everyone, give a round of applause for Craig Gordon. Craig has worked tirelessly with Classroom Struggle, and we've benefited immensely from his expertise and his knowledge and his willingness to always go and fight down to the last pennies and negotiations and all that. Also a veteran of the '96 strike. Been very instrumental in the work that Classroom Struggle has done. Also want to shout out Sarah Goody, who has been a teacher in Oakland in the early 2000s and then left for a while, but is now back and working in a newcomer school called Rosedale Newcomer. But she's also been very instrumental in helping us organize for this upcoming strike. So please, a round of applause for Sarah as well. Sarah's here in the front row. One important thing to think in mind about charters is that charter schools are not doing anything different. It's the same, traditional structure of public education. It's the same class sizes, the same methods. The only difference is that they do not have, to abide by the same bureaucratic limitations. But this is the private sector trying to make inroads into public education on the cheap. They're not even willing to spend a lot of money. It boggles the mind that, if they were smart, they would actually dump a bunch of money in, but then they really don't want to make that example, because one of the main arguments is that it's not going to help just to dump a bunch of money and resources into public schools. That's not the problem, okay? But that would definitely help, as the studies, for long studies have been, shown that smaller class sizes, more personal attention can be very helpful for our students. That's pretty much all I have right now. I'm gonna pass the mic to Keith, but again, we've had a bunch of support. The Democratic Socialists have done, a lot of work helping us get the word out, but we need more and more support as we continue building. Again, public education is the biggest crossroads where the working class meets.
Thank you. Thank you again to Peace and Freedom Party and the organizers of this event. Just a few things I want to address at closing, and I've heard mentioned about Prop 13 and the Schools and Community First Act, and I just want to let everyone here know that this go around, many of the major locals in CTA endorsed the Schools and Community First Act to make sure that it got on the ballot. So we might not have got the support from CTA, and when I say CTA, I'm talking about upper level management, but it was the leadership of the locals that came together through a structure, California Alliance for Community Schools, and we really pushed hard to put that on the 2020 ballot. And similarly, the East Bay Alliance for Public Education, which is made up of CTA locals in the East Bay, has came together, and closing the Proposition 13 loophole is one of the demands for the January 12th action. And also acknowledging the importance of labor solidarity. I learned a lot about labor solidarity as a member of the Bay Area Black Worker Center, and Brother Gerald is a part of the Black Worker Center, and also I think Walter Riley is still here, was one of the founding members, and that is very important, and we have been working with other unions, and I've also walked the picket lines for the Marriott workers and also the workers, the Kaiser mental health care workers. So it's very crucial, and I think one of the things that we're doing this go around is really working hard with the community support and also the labor support and coordinating with UTLA, because I think the future is coordinated bargaining. We're stronger together, not being isolated, and also it's very important to fight for demands that help the common public good. So we also are moving towards bargaining for the common good, to have issues front and center for the community, such as smaller class size, but community schools, really fighting for resources to make our schools and communities better. And Gerald told you how you can help. Also, lastly, as we get closer to the strike, I really want to encourage people to adopt a school, make sure that you are there to support the picket lines, talk to teachers at the schools. They may need food for students who aren't going to school, whatever the needs of the school are, I would say adopt a school. An OEA is on social media. We have a Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram. If you're on social media, follow OEA on social media to get daily updates. Thank you.
To everybody who's under 40 in this room, and there are a bunch of you, this is yours. This is your battle. We can share some of the lessons, but we can't make it happen. You folks can't. Sarah asked about key markers. Very hard question to answer. and certainly not in this amount of time. But I wanted to suggest one thing that we did in 2003 that actually led to a brief strike. I was part-time released by the union to hold lunchtime meetings at every school in the city. And I would spend 2 to 3 hours, because the lunch times were split, and simply sit and talk to people about what's on their mind, what's the issue in the school, what do they think about the strike demands, and so on. And it really drew people in, and in fact, it gave birth to a strike in defense of prep time, which the union hadn't been planning. The teachers kept saying to me, I went back to Ben, it went to Rep Council. Second point, Steve made the point completely correctly about Newsom and Thurmond and all of the money. One of the really interesting, it's loaded and one has to be careful, but interesting things about the present situation is there is a tension in the Democratic Party, in the ruling class, on the Obama, Arnie Duncan wing, which is hardballing LA and threatening Oakland with a new state takeover again, and the Thurmond Newsom wing that said enough cuts for the moment. And that's something that we need to push in without trusting Thurmond or Newsom. But that tension was visible in the election campaign. Duncan appeared in Marshall Tuck's advertising campaign sitting next to Barack Obama. Number 3, to the folks, I think the school is called Roots. Yes, go to the school board, but do not expect that they will reverse the position. What I would suggest, just as ideas, is a petition in the neighborhood, not just among the parents, but all over, demanding the school be kept open, and then maybe an occupation of the school district building for a day or 2. Now, I know if you folks are not tenured, that's dangerous. So that's got to be thought through, how one does that. And I just want to say to Keith, and I've said to various individuals, it seems to me that January 12th is an opportunity to say to all the CTA locals who are coming out in support, what about a one-day sympathy strike? It's time to show that this is as serious as the red state strikes were. And sure, every one of them will say, illegal, it's our contract. But if there's enough teacher support out there, just like the OEA thing. So I simply submit that.